Welcome to OOTO, the Out of the Office Investigation. From the past to the present and into the future of actualization.
Glad to be here. Looking forward to getting into this.
Yeah, so I want you to think about the last time you sent maybe a slightly risky text message.
Oh, we've all been there.
Right. You hit send, and suddenly your heart is just hammering against your ribs.
Yeah.
Your palms start to sweat. Your stomach drops.
Complete physiological panic.
Exactly. Why does a minor social misstep like the fear of someone just misinterpreting a joke trigger the exact same biological systemic panic as being chased by a predator?
It feels like an overreaction of the highest order, honestly. I mean, we live in climate-controlled homes, we buy our food in plastic wrap, yet our bodies respond to a delayed text message as if we are about to be exiled from the tribe and, left to the wolves.
And to answer why that happens, we have to throw out the idea that human progress is just this clean, logical staircase. We are taking a custom-tailored look into an incredibly diverse stack of sources today.
Which is fascinating because we're crossing through evolutionary biology, neuroscience, ancient archaeology.
And even property law.
Yeah, exactly.
And the mission here is to trace a single, hidden thread connecting all these fields. We're going to explore how the friction of human social interaction literally grew our brains, constructed our emotions, and built the physical structures of property and money that govern our world today. Because understanding how human emotion and intelligence are correlated is critical to interpersonal communication and successful social interaction.
Completely agree. And the answer to why we care so much about abstract things like paper money or land deeds or social approval, it doesn't lie in modern civilization. The breadcrumbs start about 1.5 million years in the past.
Okay, let's get into this. To understand why we built society, we first have to look at how our biological hardware upgraded.
Right, our evolutionary lineage as an iterative development pipeline.
Exactly. We're looking at the physical evolution from Homo erectus to Homo sapiens. Because, as the sources state, origin and evolution of the human being is critical to successful didactic progression. If you look at the 1.5 million-year-old fossil known as Turkana you see a species built purely for basic physical survival.
He had a much smaller, almost football-shaped brain case.
Right. His brain was roughly 900 cubic centimeters. He had a very primitive face, heavy brow ridges, and notably no chin.
No chin at all. But then, as we move forward in the archaeological record to fossils like the 300,000-year-old Bodo skull and the Jebel Irhoud fossils, this massive architectural shift happens.
The hardware gets a major update.
It does. The modern, high, globe-like skull emerges. It houses a substantially larger brain, and it sits above that defined, protruding, bony chin that is entirely unique to Homo sapiens.
I have to pause and push back on the standard textbook assumption here, though.
Let's hear it.
I was always taught that our brains grew so we could invent better tools to outsmart mammoths. The classic story is that the Ice Age was brutal, and we needed more cognitive processing power to build better spears.
Right, that's the standard narrative.
But looking at the actual biological timeline in these sources, that just doesn't seem to hold up. The brain doesn't look like a general-purpose computer built for cold weather.
Well, what's fascinating here is a framework called the social intelligence hypothesis. This was proposed by evolutionary psychologist Robin Dunbar.
Oh, Dunbar's number, right.
Exactly, the same guy. Dunbar argues that the rapid expansion of the neocortex, that new globe-like space ballooning in our skulls, was not an adaptation for hunting or tool-making. It expanded to handle the intense, constant friction of social complexity.
Which makes sense when you think about the environmental filter.
Yes. As early hominins started living in larger and larger groups for protection, the social math became dizzying.
Because it's no longer just about finding berries or avoiding a tiger. You have to keep track of an invisible web of relationships. Like, who is an ally? Who owes you a favor from last week?
Who is secretly hoarding resources?
Exactly.
You had to develop a theory of mind. That is the cognitive ability to read the unseen intentions of others, to anticipate their reactions, to outsmart rivals, and to maintain group coherence so the tribe doesn't fracture. The brain evolved primarily as a social operator.
It grew massive to manage gossip.
Gossip, alliances, and betrayal.
Which completely flips the script. But that cognitive leap, born purely out of social friction, did eventually bleed over and revolutionize our physical tools. I mean, Homo erectus used the exact same heavy Acheulean hand axes for 1 million years without changing the basic teardrop design.
1 million years of stagnation.
Right. But once Homo sapiens developed this intense, socially predictive brain, we started creating complex, multi-part leveloid tools. And my absolute favorite part of the sources is the description of the ultimate primitive technology. Yes, sinew. It is the closest thing the Paleolithic world had to industrial duct tape.
It really is.
If you want to talk about abstract planning, just look at the process of making sinew. You extract it from the leg tendons or back straps of large ungulates like a red or fallow deer, but you can't just peel it off and slap it on a spear.
No, it has to be incredibly carefully processed.
The sources point out that if you dry it at too high a heat, like anything above 130 degrees Fahrenheit in a modern dehydrator, it literally cooks. It turns into brittle, useless chaff.
The proteins just denature entirely under high heat, destroying the structural integrity.
But if you dry it correctly, at a very low temperature and then pound it out, it separates into these microscopic, incredibly strong, elastic, self-adhesive fibers. As wet sinew dries, it shrinks and adheres to itself and whatever it's wrapped around.
It became the perfect material for bow backings and wrapping arrow fletchings.
And figuring that out required immense, multi-step abstract planning. You had to hold a future goal in your mind, delay gratification, and manipulate invisible properties of temperature and moisture.
That level of abstract planning is a direct byproduct of a neocortex that evolved to constantly predict and manage complex variables. It started as a way to predict other people and extended into predicting the physical environment.
Right.
Which brings us to a massive revelation about how our brains actually function. Because our newly expanded brains were essentially prediction engines built for social survival, they had to develop an instantaneous alarm system.
A way to quickly signal danger and opportunity to our bodies before our slow, conscious minds could catch up.
Exactly.
You're listening to OOTO with research by Paul Bulow. And this alarm system, this is how we experience feelings. Now, if you go back to 1872, Charles Darwin published a book called The Expression of the Emotions in Man and Animals. And Darwin argued that emotions are biologically hardwired reflexes.
The idea was that we have a dedicated fear circuit or an anger circuit buried deep in the brain, passed down intact from our animal ancestors.
That concept has completely dominated how we think about ourselves for over a century. We view our emotions as passive events, things that just happen to us.
We do. But modern affective science, specifically Lisa Feldman Barrett's theory of constructed emotion, completely dismantles that Darwinian model. Neuroscience cannot find a biological fingerprint for discrete emotions.
Meaning, there is no single anger circuit illuminating in your brain when you get mad.
Exactly. In the scientific community, this is known as the emotion paradox.
Hang on, I have to play devil's advocate here. If my brain is just inventing anger based on human culture, why do I see the exact same aggressive, angry body language in a chimpanzee baring its teeth? Isn't that proof of a hardwired biological circuit that we share with primates?
That is the illusion of the paradox. We see a chimpanzee bare its teeth, and we, using our human, culturally conditioned brains, categorize that animal's physiological state as anger.
Oh, wow, so we project it onto them.
Yes, but what is actually happening under the hood of your own brain is much more complex. Think about your brain's physical location. It sits in a dark, silent box, your skull. It has no direct access to the outside world. All it receives is continuous, raw data from your body.
Which the sources call interoception.
Interoception. It's a constant stream of internal physical sensations. Raw affect, basically an internal weather report measured on 2 axes. First is valence, which is how pleasant or unpleasant you feel. Second is arousal, which is how calm or agitated you are.
Okay, so just basic data.
Right. Your brain receives this nameless bodily data, a racing heart, a tightened chest, and it has to guess what caused it. To do that, it combines the raw data with culturally embodied concepts and the social reality you were raised in to literally construct an instance of emotion in real time.
Because targeting a file, how human emotion and intelligence are correlated, is a mindset towards self-analysis and understanding.
Perfectly stated.
So, to use an analogy from the sources, the universe doesn't actually contain the color blue, right? It just contains continuous wavelengths of electromagnetic light.
Right, it's just physics.
Exactly. Our human brains decide to slice up that continuous wave, put a boundary around a specific frequency, and categorize it as blue. In the exact same way, the universe doesn't contain anger. Our brains just take a racing heart, a flushed face, and the context of someone cutting us off in traffic and categorize it as anger based on past experiences.
And if you take that exact same racing heart and flushed face, but put yourself backstage right before giving a public speech, your brain constructs it as anxiety.
Or if you are standing at the altar about to get married, it constructs it as overwhelming joy.
The physiological input is identical. The cognitive construction is what changes. And understanding how human emotion and intelligence are correlated may promote greater fulfillment to improve mental efficiency and social success.
So what does this all mean? It means our emotions aren't these passive weather events happening to us. They are proactive, real-time guesses our brains are making to help us survive our incredibly complicated social environments.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, it raises a really interesting dilemma. If we are constantly constructing our emotions in a split second just to predict and survive the present moment, how good are we at predicting how we will feel in the future?
Terribly flawed, as it turns out. The sources explore a psychological concept called affective forecasting, researched extensively by Wilson and Gilbert. And it turns out humans constantly suffer from something called impact bias.
We wildly overestimate both the initial intensity and the duration of our future emotional reactions.
We assume that if we win the lottery, we will be permanently ecstatic. Or if we get fired, we will be permanently ruined.
But there is a very specific evolutionary reason we are so bad at this. Humans possess a highly efficient, entirely unconscious psychological immune system.
Which is fascinating.
It is. When unexpected negative events occur, our brains immediately engage in a process called sense-making. We rationalize the event to reduce the discrepancy between our expectations and reality.
We tell ourselves, well, I didn't really want that job anyway. The commute was going to be terrible.
Exactly. This causes what researchers call emotional evanescence. The intense emotion quickly fades. Because if we stayed devastated forever, our cognitive system would be overloaded. We wouldn't be alert to new threats in the environment, like an actual predator or a new social rival.
There's a brilliant example in the sources that proves this. The dating game study.
Oh, that one is great.
Researchers had people predict how they would feel if they were rejected by a potential date based on their personality profile. The participants predicted they would be absolutely devastated and that the sting would last for days. But when the researchers actually manufactured that rejection, the participants recovered incredibly fast.
They just rationalized it.
Right. They decided the judges were flawed or the game was rigged.
Mm-hmm.
They experienced immune neglect, meaning they completely failed to factor in their own psychological immune system when predicting their future feelings.
And we see this flaw operate in reverse, too. We suffer from the hot-cold intrapersonal empathy gap.
This is the grocery shopping phenomenon.
It is. This is why it is famously a terrible idea to go grocery shopping when you are completely full after dinner.
Never do it.
Right, because when you are full, you are in a cold physiological state. Your brain simply cannot bridge the gap to empathize with your future self in a hot, hungry state. So you walk past the snack aisle, thinking you have incredible willpower, completely underestimating how much you will want those corn chips at 11 p.m.
And realizing this is actually so useful because defining constraints, limitations of how human emotion and intelligence are correlated can build effective daily routines. Literally structuring your habits around these biological blind spots.
Exactly. It's just wild to think that these massive brains built to navigate social friction are essentially tricking us constantly just to keep us moving forward.
You're listening to OOTO with research by Paul Bulow. Now, for hundreds of thousands of years, early humans managed all of this social friction through internal cognitive constructs and stateless societal structures.
Early human societies didn't have central authorities, police forces, or written laws. They managed all of this interpersonal friction through complex cultural systems. The newer people, for example, an agro-pastoralist group, managed conflict through a system anthropologists call fission and fusion.
Let's actually map out how that works because it's a brilliant social safety valve. Imagine two large families within the newer tribe get into a heated dispute over grazing rights for their cattle.
Which was their main resource.
Right. In a modern society, you'd go to court. In a stateless society, the tension just escalates. So to prevent outright bloodshed, the two groups undergo fission. They physically split apart, moving to different territories.
But they don't stay enemies forever. When an external threat appears, say a neighboring group attempts to raid their cattle, the fractured groups undergo fusion.
They instantly reunite.
Yes, recognizing their shared kinship to fight off the larger threat. Once the threat is gone, they might fracture again. It is a fluid, breathing social structure that prevents any one group from accumulating too much permanent power.
The sources also mention the Tonga people, who used institutionalized joking relationships between cross cousins. They created a designated social role where certain relatives were required to mock each other playfully.
It acted as a pressure relief valve.
Right. If someone was acting selfishly, their cross cousin could deliver a critical warning wrapped in humor, correcting the behavior without causing a blood feud.
These were brilliant, invisible social constructs. But eventually, the tension became too much for invisible structures. As populations exploded, these internal concepts of boundary and control spilled out of our heads and manifested into the physical world.
The transition to agriculture demanded physical boundaries.
Exactly. Look at Matthew Crude's archaeological excavation at Al-Qaran, Jordan. This site is nearly 10,000 years old.
That is 5,000 years older than the oldest pyramid in Egypt.
And what Crude's team discovered was entirely groundbreaking. It wasn't a communal village or a shared cemetery. It was a single-family, seasonally used field house. It had thick plaster walls and a patio made of carefully carved flagstones that look remarkably like something you'd buy for a backyard renovation today.
The archaeologists used a technique called stratigraphy, which is analyzing the specific layers of buried rocks and waterborne silt. And the stratigraphy proved that this stone house repeatedly collapsed during violent wet seasons and was intentionally rebuilt in the exact same spot during dry seasons over and over again.
They left heavy milling tools intentionally stored inside the ruins, trusting they would be there when they returned.
It is the absolute earliest physical evidence we have proving the existence of private farmland ownership.
And we have to remember, ownership is entirely a cognitive construct. A stone wall doesn't inherently belong to anyone. That 10,000-year-old stone house in Jordan represents the physical invention of the bundle of rights.
The legal metaphor.
Yes. In legal terms, property isn't a single object. It's a bundle of abstract sticks. You have the right of possession, the right of control, the right of exclusion, and the right of disposition.
Meaning I can hold it, I can decide how it's used, I can keep you out of it, and I can sell it to someone else.
Precisely. Al-Quran marks the human transition to formal land tenure. It is the ancient, dusty ancestor to concepts like allodial title.
Wait, I own a house in the suburbs today. Do I have a allodial title?
In a traditional sense, no. Most modern property ownership is actually subject to a higher authority, like the state, which can levy property taxes or use eminent domain. True allodial title is the absolute ownership of land independent of any superior landlord.
That's pretty rare.
It's a medieval concept that actually still pops up in rare cases today, like certain provisions in Nevada homestead laws where you can shield your primary residence from general creditors. But the core idea that an individual can exert absolute sovereign control over a patch of the earth was born 10,000 years ago in Jordan.
And this ties so deeply into modern therapy, actually. Because outlining a model for how human emotion and intelligence are correlated can elevate the individual to higher consciousness. We took the boundaries we constructed in our minds to manage social anxiety, and we built them out of stone.
We externalized our cognitive models.
But once you invent private property and the bundle of rights, you instantly create a massive new source of social friction, trade. Because now, how do I exchange my exclusive property with someone from a totally different tribe who has their own exclusive property?
You can't just rely on bartering. If I have wheat and I want your cow, but you don't want my wheat, the trade breaks down. You have to construct a brand new, widely shared social reality to act as a bridge.
You have to invent currency.
Exactly. And to trace the 10,000-year history of the economy, the sources focus heavily on one of the most successful currencies humanity ever constructed, cowrie shells.
Originating primarily in the warm coastal waters of the Indian Ocean and the Maldives, these small white shells became an absolute phenomenon. By 1300 BC, they had become a universal global currency, spreading across massive trade networks in Asia, Africa, and eventually Oceania.
But why shells? Why not rare leaves or, I don't know, intricately carved pieces of wood?
Well, because cowries naturally possessed the perfect monetary traits. First, they had solidity. They were incredibly resistant to wear and tear and immune to parasites, unlike wood or leaves. Second, handiness. They were small and easy to carry in pouches.
Very portable.
Third, divisibility. You could easily count them out for small purchases or string them into massive necklaces to form larger sums. And crucially, they had identifiability. Their smooth, shiny, humped shape was instantly recognizable, making them essentially forgery-proof in a pre-industrial age.
The specific historical exchange rates listed in the sources are staggering to think about. In 19th century Benin, a single hen would cost you 100 cowrie shells. But tragically, in the dark economy of the transatlantic slave trade, a human life was priced at 80,000 shells.
It's horrifying to put a number on that.
It is. Meanwhile, all the way over in France, 1,000 cowrie shells were equivalent to one écu, which was roughly equal to a week's worth of common labor.
This raises an important question, one debated heavily by historical scholars like Schertz. Did such complex cultural institutions grow independently in situ meaning? Did different isolated cultures invent shell money entirely on their own? Or did the concept transfer globally through mass migration and trade contact?
Regardless of how it spread, the underlying truth is exactly the same. A cowrie shell, just like a paper dollar bill or a line of code in a crypto wallet today, has absolutely zero intrinsic value. You can't eat a cowrie shell to survive. You can't build a house out of them to stay warm.
It only functions as wealth because of a collective cognitive agreement. Currency, just like our internal emotions of fear or joy, relies entirely on social reality.
It is a shared illusion. It is an abstract bridge that allows our highly complex, incredibly anxious social brains to interact and exchange resources without constantly fighting each other.
And this brings us to a massive modern-day collision, a climax in this whole evolutionary pipeline. For millions of years, we grew our brains to handle this social friction, to read intentions, to build trust through shared systems like cowrie shells. It was the original automated distribution system of trust.
Right, we outsource the friction of trade to the shell.
But look at the modern digital ecosystem. Today, we're entirely replacing human theory of mind with actual automated distribution systems. Algorithms decide who sees our content, who gets a loan, who we match with on a dating app. We have taken the very friction that built our neocortex and outsourced it to machines.
And the debate is whether that automated efficiency is destroying human creative authenticity. If an algorithm is managing the social math, what happens to the social brain?
I mean, as a skeptic, I have to say, are we just culturally devolving? If we don't need to practice reading intentions or maintaining group coherence because a digital platform does it for us, are we abandoning the very cognitive leaps that made us Homo sapiens?
It's a profound systemic risk. We are prioritizing algorithmic distribution over the preservation of human creative authenticity. We are letting the machinery do the sense-making for us.
Which brings us to the end of this incredible evolutionary timeline. Let's just review the sheer scale of the journey we've taken today. We started with early hominids literally expanding their neocortex, upgrading their biological hardware, just to manage the exhausting math of social gossip and tribal alliances.
We learned how those big brains act as rapid prediction engines, literally constructing our discrete feelings of fear and joy out of raw physiological data, using the original duct tape of cognitive concepts.
We saw how we are fundamentally flawed at predicting our own future emotions because of an invisible psychological immune system.
And we saw how these shared social realities eventually bled into the physical world, building the plaster walls of 10,000-year-old field houses in Jordan, and ultimately fueling the first global economies through the shared illusion of a shiny white shell.
It is all connected by that single chaotic thread of social friction. So I want to leave you, the listener, with something provocative to mull over as you go about the rest of your day.
Think about the digital spaces you inhabit.
Exactly. If your deepest, most visceral emotional reactions, your rigid concept of owning the home you live in, and the very money sitting in your bank account right now are all just elaborate predictive constructs built by a socially anxious ape brain trying to survive, what part of your reality is actually a fixed law of nature? And as we hand more and more of our social reality over to automated algorithms, what part of your own humanity could you simply choose to construct differently tomorrow?